talking about is that Congress appropriated, that $60 billion, I think it was. Well, they didn't sit down the next day and write out a check and send that money to Zelensky. And the other element is a lot of that money was actually appropriated or designated for the production of some weapons that the United States was not in a position to actually flip a switch and start producing. So it remains to be seen that even with this rush to try to spend all that money that has been allocated for this purpose, whether they'll actually be able to get any weapons of that Ukraine could use. But this notion that Donald Trump's going to come in and negotiate a settlement in 24 hours, I think the Russians will present him with a fait accompli. They will have already taken so much territory that they're in the driver's seat. Trump will not be in the driver's seat on this. He's not going to have any leverage in negotiation, because to ultimately have to be in control and dictate the direction of a negotiation, you got to hold some, pardon the pun, trump cards.
Right.
And in this case, Trump. This is the only time that Trump won't have any trump cards to play in this game.
Larry Johnson explains that the $600 billion Congress appropriated for Ukraine isn't exactly what people imagine. It's not as if the U.S. wrote a massive check and handed it over to Zelensky the next day. A lot of that money was allocated for future weapons production, which means it's tied up in contracts and cannot be instantly converted into usable military aid. The U.S. defense industry can't simply start producing these weapons overnight. Supply chain issues, logistical hurdles, and bureaucratic red tape slow the entire process down. Even with this rush to spend the allocated money, it remains uncertain if Ukraine will ever see the weapons it desperately needs in time to make a difference. The U.S. defense industry is already stretched thin. Supporting Ukraine means diverting resources from other commitments. Global supply chains are still recovering from disruptions. Building advanced weapons requires rare materials, specialized components, and skilled labor. Even when funding is secured, navigating the complex web of government contracts and regulations slows down the process. This situation leaves Ukraine vulnerable. Promises of future weapons mean little when Russian forces are advancing today. This creates a significant problem for Ukraine. They need resources now, not in a few years. Meanwhile, Russia is steadily advancing, fortifying its positions, and waiting for the West to wear itself out. By the time any serious negotiations take place, Russia will likely have already secured key territories. Johnson highlights that Russia's control of these territories puts them in the driver's seat, meaning they will dictate the terms of any peace deal. For Donald Trump, or any U.S. leader, this means approaching negotiations from a position of weakness. Trump has often boasted about being able to negotiate peace in Ukraine within 24 hours. Johnson dismisses this notion, pointing out that Trump will not have any leverage to dictate terms. Russia will hold all the cards, having solidified its gains. Negotiating peace is not a simple real estate deal where both sides can make concessions and walk away. It involves deeply entrenched political and territorial issues that go beyond simple compromises. Trump's bravado might resonate with his base, but the reality on the ground is much more complex. The idea of leverage is crucial here. For any negotiation to succeed, one side must have something the other side wants. In this case, Johnson argues that Trump won't have anything to offer. The Russians will have taken so much territory by then that they won't need to negotiate on favorable terms. They'll simply demand recognition of their gains and move forward. Trump's hands will be tied, and any deal he strikes will be seen as a concession to Russia's victory, something politically difficult to sell in the U.S. Johnson also points out that the American public is growing weary of these endless conflicts. There is little appetite for another prolonged military engagement, especially one that doesn't directly serve U.S. interests. This public fatigue adds another layer of complexity to any potential peace talks. Trump, or any leader, would have to navigate not only the geopolitical realities but also domestic pressures to end the conflict swiftly and decisively. Another significant aspect Johnson highlights is the strategic nature of Russia's actions. Russia is playing a long game, positioning itself to control key territories and resources. They are not just fighting a war in Ukraine. They are challenging the US-led global order. This is about more than just land. It's about power and influence on the world stage. Russia's actions in Ukraine are a direct challenge to Western dominance, and how the West responds will have far-reaching implications. China is also closely watching these developments. How the West handles Russia will influence China's strategies, particularly concerning Taiwan. If the US appears weak or unable to counter Russia effectively, it could embolden China to take more aggressive actions. The stakes are incredibly high, and the outcome of this conflict will shape the geopolitical landscape for years to come. Johnson's analysis points to a broader theme. This conflict is about more than just Ukraine. It's a struggle for global influence. Russia's actions are challenging the US-led world order. Let's consider some of the key players. China. China is watching closely. How the West handles Russia will influence China's actions in places like Taiwan. Europe. European nations are divided. Some want to continue supporting Ukraine, while others are pushing for peace. The Global South. Many countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America see this conflict as a proxy war between great powers. They're calling for a negotiated settlement. Johnson stresses that even if the shooting stops, the conflict won't truly be over. The political and economic fallout will linger. Ukraine will face the challenge of rebuilding, while Russia will solidify its gains and strengthen its position. The US and its allies will need to decide whether to continue supporting Ukraine or push for a negotiated settlement that acknowledges Russia's victory. Either path comes with significant risks and consequences. In the end, Johnson's analysis offers a sobering reminder that geopolitics is a complex game of power and strategy. The promises of aid and optimistic timelines mean little when faced with the harsh realities of war. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for anyone trying to make sense of this conflict and its broader implications. The future remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. The road ahead will be anything but easy. According to Larry Johnson, Congress approved a $600 billion aid package, but it's not as simple as cutting a check and sending it to Zelensky. Much of that money was earmarked for weapons production, and the U.S. isn't equipped to instantly ramp up manufacturing. Even with the rush to spend these funds, it's unclear if Ukraine will receive weapons in time or in quantities that matter. The idea that Trump could negotiate a settlement in 24 hours? Unrealistic. By the time Trump takes office, Russia will have likely secured significant territorial gains. They'll control the terms, leaving Trump with little leverage. To dominate a negotiation, you need leverage, trump cards, if you will. But in this scenario, Trump will find himself without any to play. Thanks for watching.